Okay, friends, a very good morning to everyone. It's really a pleasure to see the whole Indore group present here. And I want to extend a very special welcome to Mr. Javier Rodriguez, who has very kindly agreed to our request and is with us today. Many of us know Javier, but for those who are listening him for the first time, I'll briefly introduce Javier. Javier comes originally from Spain. In his mid-teens, he came across the work of Krishnamurti and was instantly struck by its wholeness and the ring of truth. From 1975 to 78, Javier was a student at Brackwood Park School, founded in England by Krishna in 1969. After completing a BA in the humanities and an MA in Spanish language and literature in the US, he returned to Brackwood Park as a teacher in 1990. There he met up with Krishna's close collaborator, Dr. David Bohm, and actively engaged with him in the exploration of the latter's dialogue proposal. Javier spent 2 years. I think there's some echo going on somewhere. I don't know. As a resident scholar at KFI headquarters in Vasant Vihar. On his return to Spain, he conducted a K-inspired inquiry group, translated several K books into Spanish, and became a trustee of the foundation Krishnamurti Latin Americana, the K Foundation responsible for disseminating his work in the Spanish-speaking world. He also joined Krishnamurti Link International, an informal group of former Brackwood staff members brought together by the German industrialist Friedrich Rohe, who was a close friend of Krishna during the last 3-4 years of his life and a lifelong supporter of the K institutions worldwide. Javier was one of the main editors of KLI's magazine, The Link, which served as an international forum for the study of the teachings. In 2000, Javier moved to the Netherlands, where he has been residing ever since. He has been collaborating with the Dutch Krishnamurti Committee and continues to be associated with KLI. He edits Grohe's newsletter, which we receive every year, and is an active in KLI's international network of activities. In the year 2016, Javier started giving a course offering a comprehensive introduction to Krishna's life and teachings. The idea of this course stems from his sense that they are universal in nature and a potential avenue of significant insight and fundamental change. As such, he feels they deserve the closest study as well as widest dissemination for their veritable education for mankind. Javier is currently working on compiling a book on K's life and teachings based on his research for the course. With the outbreak of the pandemic, he is hoping to be able to offer his introduction to K's life and teachings online in near future. With these words, I welcome Javier once again, and he is going to talk on exploring meditation, a tentative reading of Krishnamurti's booklet Meditations, published in 1969. So Javier, welcome again, and the floor is yours now. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Dubey, and thanks a lot to everybody for the kind invitation to share with you once again in this inquiry. I ventured to approach this question of meditation because it seems to me that the more I study K, the more I deepen myself into this whole issue of human self-understanding and transformation, that meditation is really at the center of it. Krishnamurti did not they used to put it sort of at the end of his presentations, of his talks, as sort of a culmination of a whole process. But he was already quite aware, it seems to me, or he used to say sometimes, that actually his whole teachings was meditation from beginning to end. So while meditation may have a very specialized meaning at certain levels, in the overall picture, it contains the whole movement of perception and transformation and going beyond even the domains of consciousness as we know it. Of course, I think in the Indian culture in particular, the word meditation has been central to the whole religious quest. So you would be probably more familiar with the whole wide range of meaning of that and practices even of that term than I would be. In the West, as you know, the word meditation was made popular only in the 60s or so, when there was a lot of importation from India and the gurus brought it over. And then they started with their practices, with transcendental meditation, with Zen meditation, and all kinds of meditations, which were offering indeed a way to a journey to some kind of transcendental states, enlightenment, and all the rest of it. Now, in the West, of course, in the religious tradition, there was a different word for what was equivalent, well, not quite equivalent perhaps, but that was similar, namely contemplation. The Christians didn't call it meditation. They reserved meditation for some other aspect of their religious journey. In the West, the religious journey had three main, they structured it as having three fundamental aspects. One was the so-called via purgativa, which was the way of purgation, in which, given our state of general disorder, of general confusion, of general conflict, that one has to put one's house in order. So that was their thing. The whole point of morality was that, to find a way of integrity such that people would behave themselves out of a sense of goodness. This was called virtue. So the way of virtue was very much encouraged as setting the ground of order of a truly religious person. But that was not sufficient in terms of the actual encounter with that which is sacred, which was the whole point. It's part of it, is necessary but insufficient. So they felt there had to be there's another place. So they had to reflect. Part of the process of purgation was reflection, self-recollection, the looking at yourself. And that's what they properly called in the West. The word meditation was reserved for that journey of self-reflection. And that somehow fits with the word, because the word meditation just means, in the dictionary, means to ponder, to think over. So that's what they were trying to do, to think over, to ponder about their lives. They did it, of course, within a certain religious context and so on. That was their thing. But the main point was to get to know what you are and understand that a bit rationally, if you like, to contemplate, to ponder over, to question, to go further. But then there was part of the purgation, part of the order. There was the contemplative, the via contemplativa, which is the way of contemplation. There, what they were doing, according to them, what they were proposing in such books as The Cloud of Unknowing, which was a bit manual of contemplation from the Middle Ages, was to forget yourself and enter into a space, come to a space of mind in which there is only seeing. There is no knowing, only seeing. That emptiness, that quality of silence, that's why they sought silence and solitude. That was their way. In order to empty yourself of yourself, because the self is the stopping of the connection between the sacred and mankind. If you were lucky, and if the love was burning in your heart, then sometimes that cloud would open and there would be the other there, right? The other, well, I call it, I used Krishnamurti terms of it. They didn't use that word, but the nameless would be there for them, according to them. Anyway, this was their description, right? So the nameless would be there, would all come through the cloud of unknowing with its light. That was the journey of these contemplatives in the West. Krishnamurti didn't seem to like the word contemplation. He felt that Christianity had not gone far enough in terms of this inner exploration. And he didn't want to be associated with them probably either, because it's a tradition and it's a kind of systematized thing that they did. So he used the word meditation. But as you know, he always had a problem with that word because he had to counter the meaning of the dictionary as pondering over, weighing, measuring. And therefore he felt that the word measure did not fit at all, because he was taught, it was still reflection, thinking over, did not fit at all with the meaning that he wanted, which was this state of complete openness, complete emptiness, and therefore pure perception in which something other can take place. Now, when I arrived at Brookwood Park as a student, there was a meeting with Kay. And a meeting was called between Kay and the students. And I sort of had already a picture, because I had studied him a little bit by the age of 17, of how he went about it, the order of his talks. He started talking about, he painted a picture of the world as a violent place, of society as essentially corrupt, as human beings essentially selfish, and therefore generating a world of chaos, of violence and suffering. For him, there were two problems only that mankind really had, which were violence and sorrow. And if you were at all serious about your life, you had to tackle those. But that you had to see first, right? You had to see the panorama of the world, of violence, sorrow, exploitation, war, the whole thing, and then moved in to the consciousness. And we found conditioning there, the whole movement of division and conflict stemming from the structure of consciousness, then transcended that and came to meditation and the religious mind. So I felt that was that only appeared after a certain other journey of self-exploration, of encounter with the world, of seeing that you are the world, and then you come to the realm of consciousness in which observation is of primary, because you meet the self as a duality. And to transcend that becomes the ultimate challenge in terms of dissolving the whole structure of conflict. So, but what did he do? I was expecting him to start like that. But what did he do? He said, he started talking about meditation. Now, I was a bit surprised. He says, he's starting from the end. What's he doing? Of course, he could do whatever he wanted. He was the teacher. Now, he started meditation. He actually asked us, he said, what do you know? Do you know anything about meditation? So people piped up and said, yes, transcendental meditation. That guru was going on around. I forget his name. The guru of the Beatles. He was going around with a mantra meditation. I gave them a mantra, made a lot of money, and everybody was very happy. And so transcendental meditation, Zen meditation, all kinds of meditations were mentioned by people. It was already popular. This was the mid-70s. So already by the 60s, that whole had become part of the culture and was circulating widely. So Krishnamurti did like this, sort of brushed it all aside with his hand and said, you all know the wrong things. So he said, all right, let's get the right thing then. So he started talking to us about meditation, and not just as an abstract thing, but as something to experiment with, to do. Because he said, you study mathematics, you study all kinds of things, but actually meditation is just as important or more than all those things. It's part of life. You might think it's something from some cuckoos from some exotic land, but actually is intrinsic to what it means to be educated. Now, that was new. Nobody had told me that that to be educated, you really had to find out, not just find out abstractly, but actually have a mind that was in a state of meditation. That the meditative mind is really the educated mind. Mind in meditation is what it means to be really educated. Now, that was, I mean, I don't know who would even today, in any kind of teacher training college, would say that. But Krishnamurti was saying it in his school. He said, you need this to be a, because this goes to the core. According to him, went to the core of what it meant to become a good human being. Become is not the word, as you know, for him, but to unfold, discover the nature of goodness, the nature of wholeness. So he said, all right, I'm going to show you. So he proposed to us that we experiment with it, find out, begin to explore it. That's why I call it exploring meditation, to explore it ourselves actively. So he said, go sit by yourself. He actually, I remember him saying, do it 2 hours a day. Now that 2 hours, that was a bit long for these restless adolescents to sit quietly for 2 hours. That was a bit much. We already had morning meeting at Brockwood Park, which was a 10 to 15 minute, I think it was 15 minutes at the time, silent meeting every morning with the whole school. We all sat in the assembly hall in silence. Sometimes I played a piece of music or a poem, but generally we sat quietly there. This had been Kay's idea, proposal, for starting the day already with a certain quality of stillness and awareness that might be helpful in terms of sustaining that same quality of awareness throughout the day. This was his sense that, look, we need order. So the via purgativa was very much present there still, the sense of we need order. Meditation at its deeper levels, what people are looking for, this transcendental experience, lends itself to self-deception unless you have this quality of freedom from self-deception, from this disorder that your mind creates. And that order is brought about by awareness. So if you start the day with a quality of quietness and sensitivity, see, you develop sensitivity. You sustain sensitivity, which is what is important here. It's a question of seeing. It's a question of sensing what is true. If you're full of yourself just at the first of dawn and you continue throughout the day, then that disorder will continue. Whereas he felt, if you are aware, then you meet every challenge, and at the end of the day, you have no challenges. So that is put to rest. You can even at the end of the day make a review of your day before you go to bed, and you put that in order so that your mind is at rest. And when he goes to sleep, then he really rests and is not busy trying to solve the problems that he has not solved during the day. He felt that dreaming is essentially this, is the attempt of consciousness to solve the problems in sleep that he has not met during the day. So if you meet them during the day, and I think we all know that's not that easy, then you have a quiet mind at the end of the day, so that in sleep, the quality of energy is there. The brain recharges. As you know, Krishnamurti, in fact, used to say that he had his deepest states of meditation were in his sleep, which is very interesting. The enlightened man had his deepest states of awakening while he was asleep. That is fantastic. So the quality of mind, you see, this being asleep is still awake in a very deep sense because of this quality of order. Now, that was his thing. So we had morning meeting, but on top of that, he said, sit quietly for 2 hours by yourself. He emphasized that we did that in a group. The first thing was in a group, but that we did it by ourselves for 2 hours. Now, that was a challenge. And he said, first, see if your body can be still. He felt the stillness of the body was very important. And you'll find that they can't. You're fidgeting, you're itching, you're wanting to scratch. So don't control it. Don't say, oh, I must do this, I must do that. Just watch this thing, how it's working. So if that's, and also fix your eyes. Now, he gave us all kinds of very specific instructions, as you can see. Fix your eyes, right? So that they don't move, because the eyeball, he said, the movement of the eye is very directly connected with the movement of thought. If you still the eye, then already that helps a little bit to still the movement of thought, because it goes back and forth. Right? If you move the eye, thought moves. So there's still the eye, don't move it, and first look around you, feed the eye, because the eye wants to see, and once you've seen, close them and fix them. Then you see if the mind can be still. And you see it's not still, it's one thought following another. That's the way of the streaming of consciousness. That's how we know it, right? So you don't control it. You see, don't say, oh, I mustn't think. Or, yes, meditation is to stop thought, or I'm going to stop it. No, the movement of thought is to move, right? It's the nature of thought. This is how thought works. It's like any other natural process. He used a very simple metaphor for us kids, I suppose, which was, it just is like a flower. It blooms, well, it's born, blooms and dies. So that's the movement of thought also. It's like anything else, any manifestation. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But let it end. If you try to control it, you chop it in the middle, and that's disorder. That's why it comes back again, right? So allow it to end. Don't choose. Don't say this is good, this is bad. Don't identify and don't reject. You are in a movie. You're in your own movie. You are not part of the movie, you see? It's just going on. So can you watch it without choice? This was the whole point of exercise, essentially in choiceless awareness. Right? It's just your movie. So not your movie, it's just the movie. It's just consciousness, right? Moving. So just watch it, and as you watch it, then the one thought ends, another begins, and there comes a point at which the thought ends and no other begins. There's a gap. In that gap, there is a sense of no division between the inner and the outer. Play with it. Find out. It's fun. You had to put in that little sweet for us to give us some promise of some fun, because we were just kids, and if something wasn't fun, we didn't do it. So we experimented with it, some of us, and we found that what he said was true. That if you listen to thought, then thought at least slows down, right? And if you watch without choice, indeed, the whole thing keeps moving and then empties itself. This was part of the question that you had asked, right, Mr. Dubey? Does meditation empty? Is it true, really? Because that was Krishnamurti's basic definition. Meditation is the emptying of consciousness of its content. Well, I think there's a deep meaning to that. But at least at this level, this is part of it, right? Of this sense of this movement of thought, and then thought ends. There's emptying consciousness of its content. That thought ceases, subsides. Right? If that's sustained, you can see that the emptiness would just be, probably that gap would become wider. Right? I mean, maybe some of us didn't experiment far enough to be able to say that, but at least that far we did it, right? Of saying, yes, this happens. The thought stops, there is no other thought, and in that space of no thought, there is no duality. This is a genuine discovery, that it is the very streaming of consciousness that creates the separation between the inner and the outer. The very streaming of consciousness itself, the very streaming of thought that generates that divide. That's a really interesting thing. I think we generally do not consider that, right? That is, we think that is the way we think that is responsible for the duality and the division. But actually, it's the stream of thought itself that does it. So it's in the movement of thought where that division is to be found, right? Now, this is part of meditation. He said, this is part. This is just the beginning. To explore, do it, and when I come back next year, we'll talk about it. Well, we never did talk about it. We should have done it. We should have sort of gotten onto it and said, all right, did you experiment with this? What happened? But I think he was not keen on becoming kind of what do you call it, an instructor. He wanted us to find out by ourselves, so he left us to our own devices after that. But the question of meditation as a whole, right, as the center of Krishnamurti's teachings, in the sense of, as he said, being a meditation from beginning to end, right? He said, my teachings are a meditation from beginning to end, so it's not to be separated, right? It's not meditation at the end and purgation at the beginning. It's all the whole thing, because the very choiceless awareness that he proposes as laying the ground of order is the beginning of meditation. Then he goes on further, right? He says meditation then unfolds, right? Because meditation then is that emptiness, right? Is that state of non-duality. Right? First, there is duality, it's just thought. But again, you remove duality by not choosing, by not bringing your judgment to bear on what is observed. Right? This was the key that he felt was very important to understand, that psychologically, as long as there is an observer, there is duality, there is division, and therefore there is no perception. And we miss the actuality, and conflict persists. So he felt that, you see, a mind, a human being who's riddled with conflict, who lives in that kind of duality, cannot approach truth. Because that very fragmentation means that mind is caught in its own self-deception. So freedom from that self-deception is fundamental, and from that duality is fundamental in the quest for truth. It has to be whole, it has to be free from his own internal dualities, right? Which is a misperception, is a mechanism of misperception, in order for that which is really true, to emerge. The ending of the false is the beginning of the truth, or the awakening of the truth. He went negatively about it, like the good old mystics, the via negativa, that the ending of disorder is order. The ending of duality is wholeness. So these endings become very important, and that happens indeed with the perception of the falseness of their falseness. So this was his thing. Now, that was also what he told us, already warned us. Look, when you approach meditation, actually, you try to watch your thinking. There is an observer separate from thought. And you say, this thought is good, this thought is bad. I shouldn't be thinking that. Oh, God, what is that? What am I that? So the I is already judging, classifying what belongs to it, what does not belong to it, within the stream of its own consciousness, which is a very weird situation. We are split already internally. The moment we have a self, we have an ideal of ourselves, we have a notion of our morality and so on, that we start judging what we are, and therefore not even comprehending, embracing, seeing that which is streaming through us. What's streaming through us is not even us, is the whole of humanity, is mankind. So the whole notion, for example, is also not there in our culture very much, that in each of us, the whole of mankind is present, that the whole of human experience is present. So you can imagine, if that is so, what kind of horrors are to be found within this consciousness which tries to be pure and all that kind of stuff. You got to go through that stream of selfishness, the stream, what we call the stream of vulgarity, which is inbuilt in the consciousness of mankind. In fact, you can see it that when he started the whole process in Ojai for Krishnamurti, one of the descriptions he made in this book, The Path, was that he went through the whole of experience of mankind. That was his inner experiencing of that whole stream of consciousness of mankind and coming to the end of it. So that was truly a state of meditation in the unfolding of that whole content and letting it come to an end. To come to the end of the whole stream of consciousness is part of his proposal, radical as it sounds. To come to the end of the streaming of consciousness in terms of the psychological consciousness, of the search for being through time and experience. He denies the validity of that. He came to the understanding and insight that that was a false movement, which is what mankind has done through the ages, right? So this is his process. Watch out. Can you observe without the observer? Because the observer, while intending the good, intending to bring about order and virtue, is actually the factor of division and conflict that keeps fragmenting life and perpetuating conflict. So is that, you see, as a contradiction within the structure of consciousness and within our very own moral intent. The intent is good, the means is mistaken, but the means is not seen to be mistaken, right? So that's why we perpetuate this state of disorder. So he says, careful there. There is a simple thing for you to discover. What is the observer doing here? What is the observer? Is the observer really bringing about order? Or is the observer the essence of disorder and conflict? So the conflict is not out there in the field of reality. It is, of course, but the fundamental source is in the division of perception. It's all in perception. If we perceive rightly, if we stay with what is, then we have a way of going beyond what is, because what is made by the false misperception of fact. If we see fact correctly, then that structure that we have built on misperception dissolves. So all these issues of envy, violence, and the rest, because they are based on misperception, on misconception, on the observer imposing itself on the observed, they disappear. So we have there a principle of transformation, of clearing the ground of disorder. And he said, when there is order, there is energy. And that energy is not just energy, but is a quality of wholeness involved in it, and he called it love. Right? There's intelligence, love, all those good, wonderful qualities, according to him, would emerge out of the sense of non-duality. So that's why meditation for him was of fundamental importance, not as something ultimate, not as the search for experience, a transcendental experience. That would come naturally if one does one's work, right? So, because it's part of wholeness. The whole speaks to the whole, right? Is in the whole, is in that movement. Or as he used to put it very beautifully, the alone speaks to the alone. It's a very beautiful thing. The alone, the all oneness, the all one speaks to the all one, right? So there's a connection. But to come to that aloneness, what he called aloneness, means stripping all that one is not, if you like. The divisions, the streaming of consciousness says you will never be alone as long as you think. I used to think, what? Because the streaming of thought is the streaming of the collective. Thought is intrinsically collective. So as long as you think, you're all together with the crowd. The crowd is inhabiting you. The stream of consciousness, the social stream is you. Right? You still have to acknowledge that is you. But the emptying of that, therefore, is the beginning for him of true aloneness. True aloneness. Now, in this quest for order and aloneness, I said I would use partly this refer to just to give some quotes to illustrate some of these aspects from Meditations 1969. It's a little booklet. Why I chose it is because it was one of my favorite writings of Krishnamurti when I was a teenager. I used to carry it in my pocket all over the place because it was so beautiful. He said such beautiful things and suggested, you see, that out of this quietness, out of this quality of space and silence that emerges when you are not busy with yourself, when you're not in that stream of consciousness, the beauty, not only the senses are heightened in their sensitivity, that color is God, like he used to say. He said in a notebook, right? Color was God. Now, but okay, for him, God wasn't perhaps all the highest yet, but it was something immense, explosive, right, with a quality of timelessness involved in it, if that sensitivity is up to the perception. That's it. Even a flower could send him off into an ecstasy of transcendental things, or the sound of a bell, or the playing of a flute by a little boy mending the cows. You see, that whole thing of pure perception that has no borders, therefore implicit, because thought is not controlling it. We're not from the focus of time and the focus of perception. So this was why I loved this little book of his, and I liked it very much. And I'm going just to read a couple of things from here to illustrate some of these points, and then we can have a little conversation. Because he mentions certain things which are really very, very beautiful in terms of different aspects of meditations that really do awaken when you do it, and which are, of course, for him, meditation was always a surprise, because there was always something new in it, naturally, because you're not coming from the past, right? It's not a pre-meditation, like he said, right? Most meditations that are systematic are pre-meditations. You know, premeditation, when there is a crime, is an aggravating factor. So let's not have that. He said, the soil in which the meditative mind can begin is the soil of everyday life. So he never made that distinction, right, of putting it somewhere else. Go to the mountain. No, you're in the street. You're in your house with your family, or not. So the soil in which the meditative mind can begin is the soil of everyday life, the strife, the pain, and the fleeting joy. It must begin there and bring order. That was the thing. Lay the ground of order, and from there move endlessly. But if you are concerned only with making order, then that very order will bring about its own limitation, and the mind will be its prisoner. So it's not just order, careful. In all this movement, you must somehow begin from the other end, from the other shore, and not always be concerned with this shore and how to cross the river. So already a letting go of your concern with order. You must take a plunge into the water, not knowing how to swim. And the beauty of meditation is that you never know where you are, where you are going, what the end is. So he's entering into uncharted territory already, right? If truth is a pathless land, how do you get there? You have to get lost. So that's what he is saying. Get lost properly. So this is the ground of order in daily life. He says you have to set it there. Yeah, so part of the order, he suggests, is a certain freedom from certain contents. So I read that one. It had rained heavily during the night and the day, and down the gullies the muddy stream poured into the sea. He was a great observer of nature, as we all know. The beauty of his descriptions is just wonderful. Making it chocolate brown. As you walked on the beach, the waves were enormous, and they were breaking with magnificent curve and force. You walked against the wind, and suddenly you felt there was nothing between you and the sky. And this openness was heaven. To be so completely open, vulnerable to the hills, to the sea and to man, is the very essence of meditation. To have no resistance, to have no barriers inwardly towards anything. Yes. To be really free, completely, from all the minor urges, compulsions and demands, with all their little conflicts and hypocrisies, is to walk in life with open arms. And that evening, walking there on that wet sand, with the seagulls around you, you felt the extraordinary sense of open freedom and the great beauty of love, which was not in you or outside you, but everywhere. We don't realize how important it is to be free of the nagging pleasures and their pains, so that the mind remains alone. It is only the mind that is wholly alone that is open. You felt all this suddenly, like a great wind that swept over the land and through you. There you were, denuded of everything, empty, and therefore utterly open. The beauty of it was not in the word or in the feeling, but seemed to be everywhere about you, inside you, over the waters and in the hills. Meditation is this. Meditation is this. What is this? Is this total sense of emptiness, openness to everything, no inner resistance, but also freedom from all the nagging pleasures and pains that we, occupy our daily lives. So to have that quality of freedom also in oneself, will give importance to such small things, right? So that is really, you see, that's the kind of thing I loved, because I used to walk a lot along the hills in my native area and along the shore. So I was really very keen to see where was this heaven of his, if it was possible, you see, to discover it. So let me read another one, because he used to talk sometimes about the meditation of the heart, and I didn't understand that. What did he mean? Is there different meditations? There's a meditation of the senses, a meditation of the mind, and a meditation of the heart, or there is just meditation. But he felt there was different, you could put different words to it. And the meditation of the heart, it seemed to me, is a very beautiful suggestion, because it's not just the mind that is involved, but our feelings are involved, and maybe the heart, which we underestimate because the mind has such control, is actually a gateway to consciousness, to the inner. Maybe there is a lock there that we need to open, and meditation of the heart may be the way. I do not know. I'm just saying. He says, meditation is one of the most extraordinary things. And if you do not know what it is, you are like the blind man in a world of bright color. Because our consciousness dulls us, right? It's not open completely, right? Not even our senses are open because our consciousness is too dominant. The past dominates our lives, and therefore the present is not even in its full glory, cannot be made emerge in our awareness. It's shadowed by that past. It is not an intellectual affair, but when the heart enters into the mind, what does that mean? The mind has quite a different quality. It is really then limitless, not only in its capacity to think, to act efficiently, so that's not gone. You're not a Dumbo stumbling all across the world. You're still acting correctly, efficiently, but also in a sense of living in a vast space where you are part of everything, what he just described on the beach, right? Meditation is the movement of love. So maybe that's what it means when the heart enters the mind, that there is love. It isn't the love of the one or of the many. So make no distinction. It is like water that anyone can drink out of any jar, whether golden or earthenware. It is as though the mind enters into itself. Wait a minute. That was just Love, the heart enters the mind, but it's just like the mind enters into itself, beginning at the surface and penetrating ever more deeply until depth and height have lost their meaning and every form of measurement ceases. The mind enters into itself. We have a lot of enterings here of one thing into another. We have to look at that a little more careful to see what is actually happening. Right? This entering, there's an entrance. The heart enters the mind, but the mind enters itself, right? And he finds his own depth. In this state, there is complete peace. Not contentment, which has come about through gratification, but a peace that has order, beauty, and intensity. So here we are again. Order, beauty, and intensity. It can all be destroyed, as you can destroy a flower, and yet, because of its very vulnerability, it is indestructible. This meditation cannot be learned from another. You must begin without knowing anything about it, and move from innocence to innocence. So that's his proposal. Okay, I think I talked long enough.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you for beautifully describing what meditation is. I think you have touched all aspects of it. And you also talked about the method, because Krishna has a way of, explaining things when he is talking to children. Then he talks about ways of reaching certain things and so on. He also says at one place that meditation is an attempt to see if there is an end to knowledge. You talked about consciousness, which is part of knowledge. And in that, therefore, one gets freedom from the known. He says meditation is not a means to an end. There is no end, there is no arrival. It's a movement in time and out of time. So it's very well explained. I thank you once again for taking it very well. I would like Professor Krishna and Dr. Gajanan Rao to make some brief observations before we take questions or whatever. I think Dr. Parekh wants to make an observation. Professor Krishna, would you like to say something, sir? Sir, unmute yourself. Unmute.
Hi, Javier. Nice to hear you after a long period of time. It was simply fascinating to hear Javier tell us what Krishnaji meant by meditation. Actually, we don't know what meditation is. At least I don't know what meditation is. He has denied all the methods which have been prescribed in all the religious texts, because they become an attempt to achieve something, and that sustains, of course, the self. So long as the meditator is present, it's not meditation. That's what he said. And he also said that self-knowledge is part of meditation, because without that, you don't come upon the silent mind. Thought doesn't end, because you are still with problems and choices and pleasure and pain and all that, and conflict. So self-knowledge is a process of understanding, a lot of which is intellectual, but it is a more holistic thing, which is not just intellectual, because it's coupled with observation and all the senses. So as Javier pointed out, he said that also in a talk in Bombay in 1984. He said, put your heart in your mind. No, put your mind in your heart. It has no value outside it. Because the heart is love and compassion, which is wisdom. And without that, thought goes wrong. So the mind has no value if it is not in the heart, placed in the heart. And when he asked me to take charge of Rajghat, one of the things he said, when I pointed out to him that he really didn't know me and how could he take such a big decision of offering me such a position, important position, without seeing my biodata, without examining anything like what we do normally for appointing a person. He said, sir, I don't do things that way. With me, it's all done here, pointing to his heart. I mean, I didn't have the audacity to ask him, how did you fall in love with me? But it was really not love with me. It was just love. He lived with love and he acted out of love. Doesn't mean it'll always be right. It can sometimes go wrong because love only means that there is no self-interest behind it. The motive is not there. Doesn't mean that it's a perfect action in the ordinary sense of the word. But at that moment, it is perfect. And the consequences of it can be disastrous or glorious. So you have to watch. It's not that it is a perfect action in the sense we understand it, or the businessman or the politician understands it, that it leads to success. No, success is mediocrity. So a completely different way of looking at life, of looking at all our efforts and so on. That's how I understand him, at least intellectually. And one feels fascinated by such a person. To see him was actually proof that this is actually possible for a human being. If I had never met him, I would have thought that this is romantic thinking. And who knows whether it is at all possible for a human being. And in that dialogue, which is there in my book with David Bohm, Asit Chanmal, and Krishnaji, I did put this kind of question to him, that does he know anyone who was trapped in the ego field and stepped out of it? And he said, I won't answer you that question. So I said, all right, sir, were you once part of the field and did you step out of it? And very honestly, he said, I question it too. I question it too. He didn't say yes or no. He said, I question it too. That's a question with which, and you find that he was all the time asking, why did this boy not get trapped? He should have become a big theosophist and the president of the society and so on and so on. That's what normally happens when a person is associated with an organization. But on the other hand, he learned a lot and walked out of the past. So, I mean, one can describe this, but one doesn't really know what it means. Thank you. Thank you, Javier.
No, thank you.
For a beautiful journey. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot for explaining through it. Dr. Gajanan Rao, sir.
Very little to say, because after listening to Javier, in this beautiful way he phrased his words, clarity, the resonance of the voice, and if I may add, the handsomeness of the man, it all added to beauty and love. That's really it. And as I'm glad Krishna spoke too, because I also felt seeing the man, there was something of a puzzle, this man. Although he wasn't 6 feet tall, there was a kind of tension as well as warmth when you met him, as far as I'm concerned. Krishna must have met him several times, talked over things. One day I was standing at Basanta Vihar, he was walking towards me at breakfast. And he was coolly walking and his usual walk. And I was a little worried, what is he going to ask me? I was the only one standing there. Fortunately, and yet he's asking me, what's the weather like in the evening? But then, clarity was something what was aimed at by him all his life in us, in the confused minds. And probably I'm very ashamed to say that's not what we had got about several things. Confusion exists, questions exist unsolved. But what a beautiful way Javier proceeded with this talk. Almost, there was a part to it. I'm not saying there's a part, but I never listened to a talk on meditation as he had put. How one walks to it almost, sits quietly even for some time by himself, not minding anything. And when he said no resistance, that was a key word, I think. We resist everything and deny ourselves everything that's good. But that was really grand. There's one little doubt, Javier and Krishna. What did we mean, or do we mean, start on the other shore? And very simple doubt, another which you might like to tell me or explain to us. Mind entering mind, at least I can imagine. Mind entering the heart, not the physical heart, but maybe, I don't know what. The mind and the heart going together. A little explanation for all of us as to what exactly does the heart mean here? And does it come off from the mind or it's with the mind? That's about all I want to say, maybe.
Shall unmute yourself. Unmute, sir. That's Professor Krishna. Unmute.
I said, let Javier go first.
Well, I think you should go first due to seniority.
Okay. To me, the statement that you start from the other shore means without self-interest. Because this shore is the self, and the self always acts out of self-interest, whether subtle or gross. But it may deceive itself that it is not acting out of self-interest. The other shore is without the self. So,
but without attending to this shore, which you say leaving the self or reading the self, how do I go to the other?
Yeah. You see, the self is not a concrete thing like the heart or kidneys and something. It's not something nature has created. It is something that is just put together by our own thinking. And it's not, therefore, that one is all the time self-centered. There are occasions when one is not working with a self-centered motive. But unfortunately, we give importance to that part of our life which is occupied with self-interest, like ambition and position and things like that. But for instance, when we work with a hobby, you play with a child, there is no self-interest there. You grow a garden, there is no self-interest there. It can come in. But what I'm pointing out is that all our actions are not necessarily out of self-interest. But self-interest enters into it surreptitiously without our knowledge, because we have not really seen the danger of acting out of self-interest. And we have given tremendous importance to achieving through self-interest. Our whole experience in life is that the success I got, the position I had, the importance I do, the respect that people give me, all has been achieved through self-interest. But therefore you don't see the danger, you almost see the value of it. And I think that's the central illusion of humanity. Not only me, all humanity. That we think that acting out of self-interest is in our self-interest. And he's saying it is not. It's bringing about the kind of society that we have created, which is obviously so much insecurity and chaos and cruelty and so on. So actually the acting out of self-interest is greatly dangerous. But why do we not perceive the danger? So he is saying start from the other shore, meaning start without self-interest. Yeah, that's how I understand it. Yeah.
I think it makes sense.
Javier, would you like to say something more?
This question of the mind entering the heart or the heart entering the mind, I think is quite subtle, because at least the description does suggest that there are two elements that need to come together. Now, as I recall, Kay used to say our heart is not really alive. We're not really feeling. Love is gone because thought occupies our lives. And also there, you see the beginning of those meditations, 1969. I didn't read that, but he just says a phrase that is really just so encompassing and in total indictment in terms of what the human condition is, which is, in the space which thought creates around itself, there is no love. So if you call thought the mind, but that's another question, if we call thought the mind, if the thought occupies our space, creates its own space, and we live within it, then love is gone, which means the heart is not there, if we say that love is of the heart. Because it's controlled by thought and its productions, its projections. The heart is being fed by the representations of the mind. So love, therefore, is not that, because that's Krishnamurti's thing. Love is not in this field, is not in the field of thought, at least with these projections. Thought can create pleasure, but it cannot create love. So, as I understood him, is partly is to awaken the heart and to really begin to think from the heart or with the heart, if that's possible, is to first free the heart from this control of thought. The heart is being starved by the illusions of the mind. And because the mind is fragmentary, then the poor heart is just being recruited in the service of fragmentation. Whereas love is, by its nature, is encompassing, and that which supposedly heals these divisions. So the healing internally with ourselves, we have that issue of the absence of love because the mind is controlling the heart. So partly the problem is, in fact, that the mind has invaded the heart and has occupied it. It's an occupying force, as it were. So freedom from this occupation, and also freedom of the mind, because the mind has another deeper meaning than this. So if this happens, if there is suddenly the awakening of the heart, which is free, therefore, in an act of freedom, the heart awakens, then the mind itself also, because the thought is absent as a controlling factor, that would become a doorway to go inside, for the mind to go, in fact, inside itself. It's a very beautiful thing. Let me go slowly. if the heart really, for whatever mysterious reason, should happen one day to feel authentically from within, not from the projections of thought, right? That becomes a doorway. He's free from self. See, we're talking about self. That is, the heart is free from self. At that moment, is humility that really has touched it. This is what it means, humility, to be freedom from self. The heart that feels that humility authentically, not again another construction of thought, right? That becomes the doorway for the mind to go into itself. That non-duality of the heart is what allows the mind to really delve into itself. It's really it's a fantastic little thing. Fantastic, meaning something very special, because normally we don't experience this kind of unity. But when it happens, you realize what potential we have for that freedom and that wholeness. Kay pointed out, and he was in that state on a normal basis, on a normal day. That was the mystery and the greatness of the man. Right? But there it is. He opened that doorway, and sometimes it happens. And then you realize the truth of what the good old boy was saying, of the heart entering the mind. I prefer it that way, to go that way versus the other way, which I understand also. You can see you can put it both ways, yes? But because of the structure of the mind as thought, then I prefer that it goes the other way, so that there is an understanding of the begin to uncover the content of consciousness from within, because there's love in your heart, and that love itself becomes the light in which consciousness can see itself. So,
thank you.
Very well said. Very well.
Thank you.
That would also explain his statement that there is no intelligence without compassion. Thank you.
Dr. Harshad Parekh wants to make a statement. Yes, go ahead.
Yes. I like to say, Krishnaji said that the word is not the thing. That means there is something behind the word which we have to capture. And the words which come from freedom, clarity, silence, they have some power or something behind it which affects many people. And it happened to me also. The first book which I picked up of Krishnamurti, without knowing who he was, I could say, yes, what he was saying was true without much thinking, like showing that there is so much disorder in the world, and we can see the disorder within ourselves. But he is showing from where this disorder comes, and one can really go in observing oneself. But to observe that, again, it requires how do we observe? Because generally the intellect is very strong in many people, and they try to understand Krishnamurti, but I feel that it is not like trying to understand the words and the meaning. That is a intellectual thing, but one can grasp behind the word, and that begins to change our life at the core when we begin to grasp what is behind the word. And also Krishnamurti's another sentence, freedom is at the beginning. And that is also how do we read, how do we listen. I could listen to Javier very well. He spoke very beautifully with great depth, but he was very fast and very fluent. So many people who are not familiar with what Krishna ji is saying may try to understand heavier because he goes very fast. Whereas in Krishnamurti, there is a space between the thoughts, between the words, and in that silence, one can really understand. And I feel from my own understanding that thinking is not a problem. It's like if you see a bird flying effortlessly in the air and it goes on the current of air, it makes no effort to fly. But if the bird has to stop at one spot in the air, it has to make tremendous effort. So there is no problem in thinking, only moving with thinking is the real beauty. And in that, there is no conflict between the thinker and the thought, and everything moves very, very smoothly. Whereas trying to understand, trying to be silent, in that there are problems. I feel there is a conflict between what is and what should be. So when Krishnaji said, meditate for 2 hours, I don't feel that way. Meditate or keep your eyes fixed. That seems to be a kind of a discipline. And that discipline is kind of an imposed discipline, which may create more conflict. Whereas in just moving with what is, which uh, which unfolds everything what is happening within us, and just watching and not trying to change it, what Krishna ji calls choiceless awareness. That is the real teachings in which there is no conflict between the thinker and the thought. So this is what I have to say, that the word is not the thing. No matter how much we explain what meditation is to a person who has not the ability to see what is behind the word, then that explanation will be just like describing a menu in a restaurant. But the real thing is, what do we do with these words? Are we really deeply looking at ourselves, whatever is unfolding, not even asking questions to stop thinking, but moving with what is, and not doing it when there are problems, but doing it because it is a wonderful thing to just observe. As we observe a cloud in the sky, same way thoughts are coming and going and moving with it. Thinking is not a problem. Thought is not an enemy of man. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harshad bhai.
Mm.
Javier, would you like to say something, or we go to the next question?
No, nothing. It was quite clear. And I'm sorry, I do tend to speak a little bit fast. So that always is helpful to be reminded that I need to slow down. Yes, I'm aware of this issue. I have to pay a little more attention. So thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Mr. Dinesh Waghmare, please go ahead. Ask
Yeah,
your
Javier,
question.
are you able to listen to me, sir?
Yes, yes.
Sir, I was about to ask you, when you were giving the reference of Krishnamurti talking to the students, he said that you should be full of seeing outside, let your eyes be full, then you should keep your eyes closed, then your body should be kept still, and then you said about that lasting for 2 hours or whatever reference you have given, that mood or something, that energy or whatever it is should last for 2 hours. What really he was trying to do or indicate, or what he was trying to point out to students particularly? I'm interested in that. Knowing.
Well,
And what was your experience personally?
yes. I think for K, meditation was the question of self-knowledge and the question of perception. as the unifying, healing factor in the wholeness of man was very central, you see. And there was the whole, in a way, the teachings is about this, that perception, if it's wholesome, it then heals, dissolves the factors of illusion and makes our lives in relationship inwardly and outwardly and with the cosmos a real dynamic interaction. There's no fragmentation to be found. This is wholeness. This is freedom. This is the flowering of goodness. So that was the point. Now, that all sounds wonderful. And as Dr. Parekh keeps reminding us all the time, the word is not the thing. So these are just words, right? So good. It's very important to remember that, particularly when we're talking about that, which is not concrete, which is of the spirit, which lends itself, therefore, to greater delusions. But this was Krishnamurti's intent. The wholeness and freedom of man, the unconditional, to set man unconditionally, absolutely and unconditionally free. So this was part of freedom, this learning to see, to see. Seeing was all. If you see, you have done your work. It's blindness that keeps us in this mess. So that's why he was keen to teach us about the importance of this. And in India, maybe mentioning meditation might have been a common thing because everybody knew about it. It was new to us, even though it had been within the Western religious tradition in its own form as contemplation, as I described. That had been lost. That tradition of the West had lost its continuity, right? Because science, killed God in the 19th century. So that was the end of that story. And that didn't develop. You see, we didn't have a proper development of that inward journey of self-discovery, which was part and parcel, intrinsic to the true religious quest. Not dogma, not belief, which is what it became, an authority, right? But this inquiry through the psyche, through your life, and the wholeness of it. Is it possible? That is the quest. So he wanted us to learn something about it, to feel it, in fact, the significance of it, because we as human beings were at the center of the whole question of the wholeness and freedom of mankind and of the transformation of the world. That is the whole thing. The world continues as a movement in consciousness in this blindness. So if you bring light, then that blindness can end and the world can change. So he wanted us to experiment, actually do it, right? You see, because it's one thing to say, you are going to be aware and choicelessly aware, and we hold that idea in our minds, but we never really do the experiment to see if we even are able to be quiet or to see anything without choice. So he said, no, you have to find out, actually. He was teaching us, if you like, and you can say this was a method. It could be applied as a method. See, so that can be questioned, right? Fix your eyes and, sit with your back very straight. That he also said. He said many more things. Sit with your back straight and or lie down quietly, right? So that the blood flows to the brain, there's oxygenation and all that. So he said all kinds of things. Those are methods, if you like, right? Things that contribute to a certain intended state, right? But actually, internally, that's where I think the difference lies between K's instructions to these kids versus methods and techniques. This could be taken as a method and as a technique and as a practice. And if you say 2 hours, then you say from 8 to 10, right? And he used to take issue with that. You see, that is just as good as taking a siesta. So, okay, I don't mind. I'm Spanish. I like taking siestas. But that was not the point. It was to awaken to the actuality and paying attention. So to be awake. Now, I thought that his intent was simply find out for yourself. See whether you see. Become aware of your consciousness. Spend some time with it. I know you live your daily life, but you see our attention is drawn to all kinds of things. It's not consciousness itself to which we draw attention. So to have a space, a moment in the day, when you actually just pay attention to the streaming of consciousness itself, by itself. Huh? I think that's a very beautiful proposal. You see, because consciousness is streaming anyway, but we're busy with X, Y, and Z. And X, Y, and Z take over our attention, and the movement of consciousness itself is lost sight of. So to actually become aware of the streaming of consciousness by itself, that's where the self is, in its self-occupation. To figure out how come consciousness is, for example, continuously in movement. What propels consciousness? What is its movement? And is there a way of looking? Because this is the question, fundamentally. Craig always brings it down to the question of seeing. How do you look at yourself? He made a very simple logical construct. The world is you, because it is the expression of consciousness. Its conflicts are perpetuated by the internal division of consciousness. If you come to consciousness, that's the only place where you can find the answer to the world's problems. So you are that world. You are responsible for it. If you want to change society, you got to change that consciousness which is bringing it about. You cannot go out and change it because it's not an outward phenomenon. That's an appearance. The cause is internal, and you are that. Now that's a major thing to realize, that it is in each and every one of us where the world is truly embodied, and that therefore in the movement of our consciousness, that world is being recreated in the act of thinking. The world is what it is because thinking makes it so. So we are the makers of the world, and we cannot go out to change it unless we go in to change it. So this is a tremendous thing to realize, and to therefore makes one humble in terms of what to do. Because the doing is therefore in the seeing. Right? So he said, wait, take that time, don't be always going outward. Now become aware of yourself, because that consciousness contains the whole pattern of the world, is the whole history of mankind. And you are that. You want to know the world? You want to do something about it? Haha, there it is. That's the book. The book you have to read is that. It's daily talking, daily telling his story, but we're not listening to it. That's the funny, odd part about it, right? The whole story is being told every day, and yet we don't listen to it. So he said, take time to listen, become aware, see therefore how that is working. Who are you? What are you? And so on. That was the whole point. And of course, the factor of choiceless awareness was very important in order to allow the story to be told. If a child is telling you a story and you say, oh, no, you cannot say that. Or, no, that's a bad thing. That's not part of the story. I don't want to hear that. Then the poor boy, he will shut up. So consciousness is continuously trying to shut itself up in what it has to say. So it never listens completely. The question of listening completely, of making that something come to an end because it completes itself, is part of the art of listening that he was proposing. Now, when you do that, I did that, you see, when I was a student, and it was very difficult. I tell you, I thought I was a quiet boy, a thoughtful boy, sensitive boy. I thought all kinds of good things about myself, like most of us do. But of course, I was a restless and completely full of fantasy and all that kind of stuff. So I found it very difficult, even physically, to be still. And if you try that for 2 hours, boy, that's a torture. So it took me a long time. I used to fall asleep. And this was also England, which the weather is not very helpful and conducive to meditation because you are cold and damp. India is more conducive because it's warm and dry. You need something that is conducive. You see, to sit, if you want to sit under the trees, because Kay also said sit under the trees. You see, we couldn't sit under the trees. It was damp and muddy. So to really just even that took me a long time to find to find that the body, if the body could be still, if you see, he poses as a question, find out whether it can. And then the mind, of course, the mind was going on and on and on and on and on. I did this for months. And then in the spring, it was good weather. The spring of 1976 was one of the driest in England. Conducive to meditation. So I went and sat outside, you see, like he recommended, under the trees. And there one day I discovered something, or something happened which was very beautiful, and to me confirmed the truth of what he was saying. But this was only an event, okay? I'm not saying that I transcended anything. It was only an event, which was that indeed, as I listened to thought, thought ended and no other thought began. When that happened, the body was a completely different body. Look at it. The body just felt its own weight. It was there. We don't even feel the weight of our body because the mind is just controlling everything. This was the body, present itself. And there was no inner and outer. Now, why do I say that? Because there was a bird. There was a blackbird singing in a nearby tree. And that bird was not singing outside me. It was singing inside me and through me, because there was no me to create any barrier whatsoever. There was no inner and outer. It's even weird to describe it. But the sense of separation between me and me being there and a bird singing didn't exist. There was only that blackbird singing, and there was a sense of space, undivided space, in which that sound existed. That was joy and happiness. I could not believe the joy. The joy that emerged out of the sense of non-duality was incredible. That happened only a couple of times, I must say. I wanted it again next day, of course. But of course, it didn't happen. Because you look for the joy, right? You remember it, and so you pursue it, right? But you pursue it as a memory. And that's part of the art that Kay also said. Careful with wanting to repeat any of that. The whole point is to let that pass precisely and not have a continuity, right? But that's just part of it. You see, that's part of my experimentation at the time to attempt to demonstrate, or to find out rather, not demonstrate even, to find out whether what Kay said was true. And as far as I'm concerned, it was true at least up to that point. The question of non-duality, when thought ceases, and the sense of no division, inner and outer, and the sense of total perception, which is joy. I suggest you experiment with it, you see. and it is fun. He was right. It is fun. It's torture first, but then if it does happen, it's fun. Now, I wanted just to tell you, you see the KFI produced these little booklets, and this one, Mind in Meditation, is really extraordinary. It's a talk in Bangalore in 1971. There, Kay lays it out very, very clearly, how it goes from the outer to the inner and beyond. It's really one extraordinary talk. That's why I think they chose it correctly, beautifully. I suggest you read this. If you haven't read it, or if you have read it, read it again. Because right there is such a jewel of perceptiveness all the way through, like Kay alone could do.
Thank you,
Thank
Javier. Dinesh ji will come to you a little later. I know you have another question now, but let's take short questions from Durga ji and Mr. Shakti Kumar. We can extend it by 10 minutes.
Sure.
Definitely, sir. But
Okay.
you have to announce the lecture, number one. Number two, you have to fix date in December. As he said, Mind in Meditation. If you have read, you have to reread. I just say he has spoken, but he has to again come in any Sunday he likes in December.
Yeah, we'll make that request to her.
Yeah.
Okay, so Durga ji,
Yeah.
please make a short, brief question, please.
Yes, sir. I won't be long. Actually, there are
We can't hear you, Durga ji. Unmute yourself. Unmute.
is it okay now, sir?
Yeah, yes, it is.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have any questions as usual. I just
You are muted again.
She will speak out of silence by pauses.
yeah. If it is if I am silent, you won't be able to hear, sir. I had to speak or no, I can't. Yeah, it's lovely listening to you, Mr. Javier. And with I think with your resonant voice and your implicit laughter and smiles and all, you really made this morning such a heavy session of meditation so joyful, and we all enjoyed, and we all also joined your laughter and all. Yeah, I think there's lovely points you have covered up. I just have to say one or two points that are coming to my mind. So, and I think unless and until one is deeply in love with all these things, I think that is very essential. I think love, maybe we may call it passion, or we may call it interest. I think that is the fundamental quality. That I think will set one on a journey of self-discovery or self-exploration. And there are tremendous things Kay has stated. And it's a pity if we don't go into all of that in our lifetime. And it's lovely listening to you. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Shakti ji, please go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Yes, please go ahead.
yeah. You see, this Krishnamurti's talks with the students and in various places, Rishi Valley, and as Javier said about Brockwood Park, at the end of it, he tells something about meditation most of the time to the students. And one of these conversations I read in an old issue of Hindi Bulletin of KFI from 1967. And it said, telling to students that, you see, after closing your eyes, watch what you are thinking. And after watching what you are thinking, then you see, watch why you are thinking that particular thought. So it was very enlightening to bring in this why there, because with this comes inquiry. And that sometimes just observing things is a very soothing feeling, but the moment you bring in a question, then it becomes a bit, you see, it's different, like taking the stock at the end of the day. Just that I wanted to say that just watching or watching with question, this has been some questions about it in the dialogues usually. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Javier, we have come to the end of the talk now, and I want to thank you once again for being with us. And it's always a pleasure to hear you. And the intensity and the way you go into great detail about explaining things is really wonderful. Thank you so much. And as Mr. Jain mentioned, sometimes when you're free, I think sometimes when you are free, maybe next year, we'll invite you for a talk once again. Thank you so much. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
So declare the next lecture of Harsh Tankha. Please declare next lecture.
Next week,
Javier is also invited to listen him. He is friend of Mr. Harshad Parekh.
next Sunday at 11 o'clock, we have a talk by Mr. Harsh Tankha. It's on love and death. So if you're interested in any of those two things, please join us and listen to him. With these words, thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
all. Bye-bye.
Kamlesh, you can close it now, please. Thank you. Close it now, please. Please close it, Kamlesh. कमलेश कोई प्रॉब्लम है बंद करने में?